the novel opening with a striking conceit.
I'm glad you got it with a conceit. Anything you write that is set even in the past is always inflected with what's happening now. And when his male authority is challenged again, right, towards the end of the novel, suddenly that extreme entitlement bursts out again. And this entitlement has been at the heart of so many of the problems in the novel. And this is the way fiction works, is you take things that you have a hint of and that you have an emotional way into, and you start filling in these areas of darkness for yourself. So I want the reader to have several feelings at once so that they can then sit down and reread the book.
All right. If you've been listening to me over the years, you know one of my favorite genres of people to talk to are authors. Today, a very, very successful author whose latest novel, might I add, has just hit it out of the park. The Complex by Karan Mahajan is out on all on-ground as well as online stores. I highly urge you guys to go and get it. It's not a brisk, fast read. It will suck you in. It's a deep dive kind of novel. But you can come back and thank me for referring it later. And Karan's been kind enough to roll in. How are you? Wonderful to see you.
I know, great to see you too. Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. I'm going to start at the novel opening with a striking conceit.
I'm glad you got it with a conceit.
A fictional Karan Mahajan who inherits 100,000 word unsent mail from a dead man named Mohit Chopra and edits it into a book. Why did you need that distancing layer between yourself and the Chopras? And what did giving Mohit the role of quote-unquote hidden narrator allow you to do that a straight third-person omniscient narrator could not?
A great question. So one of the things that is most interesting to me in writing fiction is the instability between fact and fiction. When you read something and you think, did this actually happen? And everyone who's reading a realist novel is thinking that, like, was this uncle just like that? Was this building like that? So I always think, let's go one more level further with that, and let's actually put it into the overall conceit of the novel, so that someone might think, oh, he did get this novel from a dead man named Mohit Chopra. This is Mohit Chopra's family life. And now, when things like, let's say, the Mandal Commission protests come up in the novel, or 1984 riots, you again think, oh, were these real participants? And if so, did they really affect history? So that's the idea behind that.
Lovely. So this is that 10 years of writing question.
Oh, no.
You've been very open about it. You've said this novel took roughly a decade, much of it overlapping with your tenure at Brown. Across those 10 years, Karan, India went through Modi's 2 terms. Like you briefly mentioned, the abrogation of Article 370, the farmers' protests, the pandemic. How did the book's spine, particularly the 1990 Rath Yatra section, and Laxman's transformation shift in response to what is happening outside your window, for example? I mean, if there's a best way I can describe it.
No, it's a great question, because anything you write that is set even in the past is always inflected with what's happening now. So this novel is set largely in the 1980s, and it ends around 1990 with the first Rath Yatra. I was definitely thinking of the rise of Hindu nationalism and the way it had become an unstoppable force, and trying to ask myself, what were some of the personal seeds of that? Let's say in a Punjabi Hindu post-partition family, what kind of internal dynamics would have led to this kind of politics, for example, right? And as for the other things you were mentioning, they, in fact, if anything, made me not want to write about, let's say, Article 370 or the other things you mentioned, because we're still too close to them. Sometimes you need a little distance to really see the outlines of what something is going to mean. So,
True.
For example, with Mandal Commission, what was really interesting is, I'm sure you know this too, like lots of people now who are lefties actually had participated in these protests, right? They didn't want lower castes to have reservations. So it was interesting to ask them, what were you thinking when you were in college, right? What changed? So those kinds of questions become really exciting to ask people over time.
This is about building Laxman. I mean, critics have noted you refuse to make Laxman a seductive anti-hero. I mean, he plays in Jonathan Dee's reading, quote-unquote, grubby and small-minded, rather than charismatic. And that's a deliberate, if I might say so, almost Tolstoyan moral choice in a literary culture that often glamorizes its villains. I mean, normally you tend to do that, you know. Talk to me about resisting that temptation, Karan, to make him magnetic, and the cost of that particular decision to the reader when you think Lakshman.
So Lakshman is one of the main characters in the novel, right? He is the youngest son of this quote-unquote great man, S.P. Chopra, who had been a post-independence and independence-era figure involved in drafting the Constitution, again fictional, a former RBI governor. And he has 9 children, and they have not been able to live up to his reputation. And the youngest son, Lakshman, especially, is a never-do-well. Like, he has not succeeded at anything. He runs a failing bobby pin business. He desperately wants a foothold in Delhi or Indian politics. And he's basically a guy who instead chooses to dominate the women in the family and then the other family members as he ascends to power. So he is not, a wonderful person to be around in many ways. He is your like very pushy Punjabi uncle, essentially. But here's what I'll say is that the question of making him sympathetic never arose to me, because I have found when you have a villainous character, even if they're bad, they're usually very active. They're always doing things because they don't have a conscience in the same way. So the good characters in this novel, like this woman Gita Chopra, she's much more conflicted. What are people going to think? How do I not hurt people? Lakshman's like, God damn it, I'll do whatever I want, right? And so he is seductive in that way that the reader gets hooked by him, even as they are a little bit repelled by him.
The first section, for those of you who haven't read it, is called Gita's World. And really, to me, it's one of the most psychologically penetrating sequences in the novel. The wedding assault, the Gurdwara, the affair with Hector in Michigan, the years of unspeakable silence. Writing across that gender, across that interior landscape of shame, of survival, is a particular kind of risk. Huh? How did you find your way into Gita? What did you learn while you were there?
A wonderful question, because we've been discussing the complex, right? And it was important for me to have the complex illuminated by an outsider, in a way. And Gita is the perfect outsider because she also is an insider to a degree. She is a woman who has married into the family. She has married a grandson of S.P. Chopra named Sachin. And she actually has been living in the US. She married Sachin, moved there, but is longing for Delhi because she hasn't really found a foothold professionally or personally in this small town in Michigan. But when she comes back alone for a family wedding, she is sexually assaulted, and suddenly India also becomes fragmented, less safe for her, and she's suspended between these two places. Now, it was a huge risk to write this stuff because it is very sensitive material. You want to get it right. You want to understand the psychology of women, especially at that period, right? Now we have a very strong Me Too movement, for example. In 1980, there wasn't the equivalent. There was a lot of silence and shame. So I really interviewed a lot of people. I talked to therapists who work with women. I read historical accounts. I went back and looked at family dynamics. And I read books about the way women relate to their own bodies, books even about abortion, for example, which didn't make it into the novel, but helped me understand a little more about the way, men and women in that era might have differed in their approaches to things. And also, finally, the interrelationships between women. Could they speak to each other about these things? Were they hinting these things to each other? Which women were upholding the patriarchy? Because that also comes up in the novel, that not every woman is a feminist.
There's one fantastic thing about Karan Mahajan's The Complex is that there are many fantastic things. One of the fantastic things is it really makes you think that a lot of people in the modern day and age are predators, and that predatory behavior is now being rechristened. And they give it other names, thinking almost as though if you give it another name, it'll disappear. And it's very important for us to call that out, Karan. I mean, that's an aside, but I'm going to come to it. There are two assaults in the novel that actually mirror each other. I mean, there's Lakshman's predatory behavior with Gita early on, and that really echoes uncomfortably, if I can say that, with what later happens between Laxman and Karishma, including that there's a devastating scene in Karishma's flat. You stage these as separate crimes in tone. I mean, they're decades apart, but somehow they rhyme. you know? Were you consciously asking the reader to revisit Gita's experience through Karishma's and to question how families do that? They absorb, they rename predation. You know, they call it flirtation, tradition, devar ka humor, things
Exactly.
like
That comes up in the novel. Or, he was bothering me was
Yeah.
the famous euphemism people used to use.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That the novel is showing that even though Laxman has, to a degree, grown as a person as the novel goes on, which is that he has developed a political ideology, one that I don't agree with, but he has an ideology, that he has fallen in love with a woman named Karishma, another family member, and they have a consensual affair. The worst parts of him have only gone underground. They haven't vanished. And when his male authority is challenged again, right, towards the end of the novel, suddenly that extreme entitlement bursts out again. And this entitlement has been at the heart of so many of the problems in the novel. He feels entitled to greatness, he feels entitled to success. When Gita comes back from a visit from America, he thinks, I should be entitled to the greatness of the West as well. And essentially, the novel is showing us that people change, but not always to the degree that we think. There are certain parts of them that are inalterable.
I love reading comments from famous people and authors about the author in question, in terms of the author that I'm about to read. And it's wonderful that your book has a fair amount of them. Somebody has said, the political is a duck blind for the personal. I like that. And indeed, Lakshman's pivot to Hindu nationalism happens almost as an accident. Born from a need for cash, a snubbing at a hospital, a wounded ego. I wonder, are you arguing that the architects of contemporary Indian politics were forged less by ideology than by domestic resentments?
No, I wouldn't say that. I think that's where the novel is very particularly focusing on this one character, and that's why also Lakshman is not one of the leaders of a Hindu nationalist party. He kind of becomes an apparatchik, like a right hand man, and in his case, what I wanted to show is that you can begin opportunistically. Like, he basically starts this balm business, and he wants to sell it to the shakhas of, let's say, the equivalent of an RSS, and he then slowly through that starts to meet other people. But at a certain point in the novel, and this to me was one of my favorite parts to write, he actually realizes that he has adopted the ideology. I think you pointed it out, where he says, I've become my father, because he's like, I have beliefs now. I've been wanting a belief system this entire time. And after that, he becomes a more powerful player in the ecosystem. So I think this happens to all of us in our lives, where you kind of fake it till you make it, right? And Lakshman then becomes a more dangerous figure as well on a national level.
I'm just curious to know, the 1990 anti-Mandal protests, there's Anshul Tripaঠি's self-immolation, Mohit's burned hand, all of these lands very specifically, but you must have been, 4 or 5 years old when this happened. So you're obviously depending on a lot of research. What was the research process like? Why did you decide to make the novel's eventual narrator a boy who literally carries the scar of that moment on his body? Because you didn't technically live through it.
No, I was 6 years old, and I remember school being closed, I think, for 2 weeks or something. And some images from the time, like hearing that, a family friend lay down in front of a bus, he was in college, to protest this. So it stuck in my mind, and this is the way fiction works, is you take things that you have a hint of and that you have an emotional way into, and you start filling in these areas of darkness for yourself. So I knew the settings of these protests because I'm from Delhi. And then I started to talk to, as I said, people who had participated in them. I talked to people who knew the political actors in them. I read biographies, I read books, I read newspaper archives, the actual reports as they happened day by day at the time, because you also realize there's so much confusion on the ground, right? In retrospect, we know what happened. At the time, no one understood what was going on. And from that, I realized that Mohit Chopra, who is one of the younger characters and who resents his uncle, Laxman Chopra, because Laxman is having an affair with his mother, might express his resentment also through a protest and through politics because he cannot speak directly. And that's one of the problems in this novel that all the characters face, is that though they live close to each other, they don't communicate and they don't know how. And that's why you have all these sideways methods, affairs, assaults, political movements that are their true expressions.
I'm going to come to one of a prominent character's death, which is Karishma's death. Her walk to the train tracks is one of the quietest, most chilling passages in the book. I mean, no breakdown, no note, just a chappal caught between planks. And I'm like, man, can't she get a final speech? Can't there be an explanation? Can't there be a reckoning? You know, it's like watching your favorite movie and say, oh my God, that character should have had something.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was almost as though there was that withheld interiority, right? What does that say about women in this family and perhaps in Indian fiction more broadly? I mean, this kind of an exit here.
Well, thank you for reading it so beautifully. In this particular case, I'm linking it to Karishma's personality, which is that she is one of the strongest and strangest people in the novel, which is that she is in an abusive marriage. She ends up having an affair. And she is an opaque character. And she has a kind of death drive almost. She says at one point, or she thinks that she lived deathward, that she has a very clear-eyed vision of the world in a way that is almost disillusioned. And as a result of that, she is not the sort of person who, when she would come to a final moment, would feel the need to express herself, because her life itself has been that expression. So I don't think there's a larger point I was making there about Indian women, because Gita, for example, has a different kind of ending in the novel, which is that she is finally able to communicate with her husband and tell her husband about secrets that she's kept. Her husband is able to similarly do that with her, and they come to a different understanding of what Indian family life can be like.
That's very well answered. That kind of explains what's in my head. You know, the immigrant experience, and I'm sorry I'm calling you that because
I know, I am.
You've lived.
I mean, I am.
The immigrant experience is interesting for me because when you meet people like you, there's always moments of tenderness and moments of satire.
Right,
And as an author, you have to figure out when you want to bring that tenderness and when you have to bring that satire in. And I'm looking at Sachin and Gita's Midland, Michigan years, the basement flat in Elmhurst, the fake Kialji phone calls, Cindy Simonpreet's dining room. It's almost like a parallel novel embedded inside the Delhi novel, right? So as someone born in Stamford, raised in Delhi, who now lives in Providence, am I getting all the...
Totally right.
Yeah, the places right, your places.
I'm shocked you got them right.
How do you decide which parts of that immigrant experience belong to satire and which, which deserve tenderness?
I mean, I take it all quite seriously, unfortunately. I mean, I'm a fairly comic writer, actually, in many ways. Like Cindy Malhotra in this novel is a woman who's named herself that, and she's named her husband Val Malhotra, right? Ridiculous names. They live in Detroit. They're really trying to become Americanized. And then you have Gita and Sachin, who, you pointed out, they have a system of gaming the phone calls back to India where they'll pretend they're calling someone named Mr. Kihalji, and they are able to at least ask kaise ho aap, basically, Kihalji. And for me, the question there is like, I didn't want to hit the notes we've seen hit before. Because a lot of the notes are, oh, you arrive, you're striving, you're really trying hard. I thought, a lot of immigrants arrive there and feel just completely out of place, right? Not just that, they start dreaming of going back home. And that delusion is what I wanted to focus on. That even someone like me, who's now lived in the US for many years, every year I tell myself, oh, next year I'll move back. And I realized that's a very strange coping mechanism. That's one thing. And the other is the immigrant experience is not linear. So now a person like me can come back every year and have this discontinuous intimacy with India and feel, oh, I kind of know the place, I kind of don't. So I wanted to also dramatize that with Gita.
Anyway, so I'm going to just hark back to Karan Mahajan's second novel. It's called The Association of Small Bombs. Now, Small Bombs opens with an explosion and then it radiates outside, like through the shrapnel. don't want to give any spoilers away, but the complex is structurally the opposite. I mean, a slow contraction, generations folding inwards into one compound until something happens in a drawing room, in a single drawing room. In a way, it's an inversion. Was that inversion conscious? And after writing 2 books that end in some kind of violence, where do you go next as a novelist?
Great. No, I'm basically going through every Delhi neighborhood and every Punjabi surname is what I think. The last novel was a Lajpat Nagar novel. This is more like a model town, it's a North Delhi plus South Delhi novel. That one had a very particular structure, Small Bombs, because it is all within the blast radius of this bombing. I don't step outside it too much. This one, of course, goes and spends a lot of time in the US. It spends a lot of time in the complex. And actually, that said, I didn't conceive of them as being that different, because this also begins with an act of violence, which Gita is involved in, and its repercussions radiate outwards to different characters. But essentially, the place they're circling, if it's not the bombing as it was in the last novel, it is the complex. And the complex itself becomes a sort of dangerous, charged space. So I'm not sure which neighborhood, if you have a recommendation. CR Park, about your house in CR Park as well. Go next.
I also like to, when I'm preparing for an interview, try and search for any reviews of it. And surprisingly, reviewers keep reaching for Tolstoy and Dostoevsky.
Yeah, good for me.
Like somebody called it Dostoevskian. Somebody said there's a constant sense of danger lurking beneath the story. And your course that you teach, it's called Innovations in Indian Literature, isn't it? I mean,
right.
But the architecture of this complex feels very 19th century European in some way.
Right,
I
right.
mean, how do you reconcile those traditions? And what do you think the Indian family novel can do, what it can do that the Russian family novel couldn't?
That's a very deep and difficult question to answer quickly. The thing that I like about the setting of Indian family novels is just that India itself, the backdrop, is such a confusing place, right? Especially like the 1940s to the 80s. I'm not writing about the post-liberalization period here, because you have this tremendous force of English and the West bearing down on a certain class of society. People are anglicized. And then you have a wide swathe of people who obviously are living in great poverty. And so the characters have to carry a huge number of contradictions in their heads as they're walking around. And they're not always aware of how privileged they are. They are talking to each other in multiple languages. So I have to find a way to represent that in English, right? The tones of Punjabi, of Hindi. And also they have a very distinct relationship with the West, because on the one hand, we have a post-colonial complex at that time, which is that we like things from the West. But on the other hand, understandably, we have a great deal of resentment. Those things, that configuration feels more specifically Indian or South Asian to me than the Russian novel would have, that is from Tolstoy's era or Dostoevsky's era. What I like about Dostoevsky specifically is that his characters feel Indian because, like us Indians, they're a little bit irrational. They talk a lot. They shout a lot. So I like that.
So I wonder, you as an author, after having spent 10 years inside this family, what did you want a reader to be left holding when they close the book? I'll tell you what I felt.
Please tell me.
Yeah, I'll tell you what I felt. I mean, the book ends with Mohit and his released father standing outside A19, and they're looking at these plastic bottles, and they're in the sewer, and technically that's what Sachin's life's work helped build, helped manufacture, right? Mm-hmm. And his father asking, so who caused more long-term damage, my brother or me? I think that's an extraordinary, bleak final beat, but at the same time, it's intergenerational, it's unanswerable, it's environmental, everything. So I said, wow, man, this guy's done it.
Thank you. I appreciate
just
that.
Fantastic. So that's what I felt. But after you spending 10 years with his family, what do you want a reader to be left behind holding?
That image you provided is obviously one of them, because this idea that we don't know the consequences of our actions when we're living through them, right? We're just living minute by minute. But I also wanted the reader to come away with two other things. One was that Gita and Sachin, who have had, I would say, an average marriage in this novel, they like each other, but they can't quite communicate, they can't quite be intimate, by the end have achieved some level of intimacy and have also found a way to forge their lives outside the system of the complex or the extended family, and also to think about child rearing and having children in a different way than it was thought about before. Plus, you see this other sad thing happening, which is that there has been a consequence, a bad consequence of Laxman acting out the way he does. He reaches a kind of disastrous end. But if you think back to the beginning of the novel, you realize, again, he's going to be resuscitated as a major figure by this family that is always searching for ancestors. So he's going to become the next SP Chopra. And that's a chilling thought. So I want the reader to have several feelings at once so that they can then sit down and reread the book.
Fascinating read. I try not to do this very much because I want the focus to be on the current book. But with you, I want to hark back to the Association of Small Bombs just briefly again. I mean, there are two explosions that pretty much shaped you, right? I mean, again, how old were you? 10 or 12 when the Lajpat Nagar market blast happened? Yeah. Kashmiri separatists setting off a bomb in Lajpat Nagar. Karan's grandmom had been shopping for yarn there the day before. That's what I've read. And 5 years later, he arrives at Stanford the week after 9/11. So two explosions, one personal, one global. In a way, they've really bookended your adolescence, And obviously, they eventually became the Association of Small Bombs. How do you think those formative shocks shaped not just that book, but your instinct across all the three novels to write about violence radiating outward from a single domestic point?
I've definitely have become interested in how it is that our personal lives intersect with these political events. And the important thing to say there is, I don't want it to be that, it has to be a direct link. For example, you said I wasn't present, luckily, for 9/11. I arrived a week later. But I want to understand what, let's say, someone like me was thinking and going through, and how my career or my personal trajectory changed because I was in that era. And I think that's something a novel can really do, is that when we look back at these big events, we think, okay, this happened, that happened. What we don't know is what's the minute change it caused in someone's life. And I think that is why I'm drawn to these moments of violence, because you don't process them immediately. You process them very slowly over time. And, sometimes it's years later. So the novel, again, can also show this change over time. And I think that's one thing that links the Association of Small Bombs and the Complex, is that they are novels about changing ideologies, changing belief systems. And, I'm interested to see if I do that with the next book too.
So, this is, I must confess, a plain vanilla question I ask almost all the authors who walk in.
Great.
Simply because, the question might be plain vanilla, but the answers are quite differing, some remarkable, some very fascinating. Basically, the many lives before you became a writer.
Right.
And for me, I always read up on that, saying, how did he arrive at this point? For those of you who don't know, and that's my job as a presenter journalist, before Karan Mahajan fully committed to fiction, he'd already lived several careers. Editor at an indie press in San Francisco, urban planning consultant for the New York City government, researcher in Bangalore for a tech billionaire compiling a history of Indian entrepreneurship. And I copy-pasted this from my research. So then the Missioner Center, then Brown. Have I got everything correct?
You're really good research, man.
Yeah,
really good. You should be writing novels.
So, you have said once that it feels like you've crammed several lives into one. But looking back, do you see these detours as a delay to becoming a novelist or as the actual training ground? That's part A. Delay or detour. Which of these past lives have most shown up in the Complex? That's my last question.
Brilliant question. They were all crucial in my development as a writer, though, again, I didn't think so at the time. At the time, you were thinking, I need to make money and I want to have some time to write.
Yeah.
And, I don't want to focus too much on this other stuff. But, of course, as a writer, you need to have material. And also, every interaction you have with an individual, with a system, teaches you so much about humanity. So those 3 jobs helped me in that way. The one that most informed the complex, I think the job I had in Bangalore, which was working for someone I really liked, and was a fascinating job because I got to travel all over India. I think it was the first time I'd lived really outside Delhi. And it gave me an outsider's view of what Punjabi culture is perceived as, and the ways in which you can play with and against those stereotypes. And that's helpful to look at Punjab or Delhi Punjabis from South India is very different than looking at them from Punjab or from Delhi. So that's my answer there.
Lovely. Karan Mahajan's The Complex. And since you are going out into the market, online or on ground, to get The Complex, try and get his other 2 books also. And then maybe you can do a deep dive into his wonderful career thus far in writing. The Complex is available at all on-ground as well as online stores. Please go get it. Fascinating read. So where can they find you? While you were talking, I was actually trying to look for you on Instagram and Twitter, saying maybe I should give out your handle, but I couldn't finish it in time before I had to come back on. So are you a LinkedIn person? Twitter, Instagram,
no, man,
or
I'm in hiding, man. I'm in hiding. I have a Twitter that people can message me at. I don't really check it that much, but you can go to my website and contact me through my website.
Lovely.
Karan-Mahajan.com.
Karan-Mahajan.com. See, that's it. I mean, the beauty of radio is you want people to reach out. Tell him what you feel about his novels.
I would love that.
And what you feel about this interview. Yeah, Karan Mahajan, thank you very much.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Yeah. From me, Hrishi K, everybody who's watching, listening, till next time. We hope to get you another interesting personality. Hope you've enjoyed this one.
94.3 Radio 1.